Hello, I'm Dr. Tara Palmatier of shrinkformen.com. Thank you for watching and Happy New Year. Today's video is from an article I published in May of last year. The title is Healing Trauma from Relationships with Narcissists and Borderlines. So let's get started. Healing trauma from relationships with narcissists, borderlines, histrionics, and toxic cluster B varieties can be difficult. Sadly, difficult is oftentimes an understatement. Even so, there are some clients who have an easier time than others with the grief healing processes. Albeit, these individuals aren't representative of my typical clients. I'm just scrolling. So let's talk about greater resiliency to trauma. What makes this smaller subset of clients more resilient to trauma? Well, first, they don't have a pattern of relationships with narcissists, borderlines, and other toxic people. The relationship that led them to seek therapy with me is an anomaly. Specifically, it's an anomaly in an otherwise unblemished history of healthy, intimate relationships. In other words, they don't have a pattern of dating and marrying crazy over and over and over again. Second, their families of origin aren't grossly dysfunctional and pathogenic. What's a pathogenic family? A pathogenic family is an abnormal and maladaptive system of interpersonal dynamics which facilitates a breeding ground for cognitive, emotional, and behavioral disorders. Kind of sounds like your former in-laws, right? I'm kidding. No, I'm not. In other words, this smaller group of clients were not raised by crazy, meaning their parents modeled well-adjusted, healthy interpersonal relationships. Mom and dad didn't have personality disorders or severe traits, codependency issues, alcoholism, and other addictions and mental illnesses that lead to things like parentification, dysfunctional attachment styles, trauma bonds, and codependency. To clarify, these individuals do experience grief, depression, anxiety, and other trauma symptoms. However, they usually have a much less complicated grief experience and heal and bounce back more quickly. Why? Well, good enough parents are usually better able to instill a fundamental sense of well-being that a child will then carry into adulthood. Unfortunately, this is something the majority of my clients lack. Clients who don't have a pattern of abusive relationships and had good enough parents typically don't become consumed by the denial and bargaining rumination, shame, and self-blame most of my other clients do in the grief process. Clients who had dysfunctional, again, personality disordered or codependent parents and a pattern of relationships with crazy have a much more painful time of it. Low resiliency to trauma. And this is what many of my clients struggle with. These clients have at least one parent who has personality disorder traits, mental illness like bipolar, depression, that they're not managing well, and or addiction problems, or a codependent parent. Their parents were ill-equipped or incapable of modeling healthy relationships, self-love, self-respect, self-constructs, and boundaries. As such, these clients developed codependent beliefs and behaviors and other unhealthy coping mechanisms in order to survive their painful childhoods. People with unresolved childhood trauma wounds often recreate similarly dysfunctional and toxic relationships as adults. When these relationships inevitably break down, they often psychologically regress to a younger emotional age. Now, I don't mean they're sitting there in diapers and throwing a pacifier. I mean, in terms of how they're problem solving, how they're seeing themselves, their partner or ex in the relationship. Frequently, these clients struggle with what their rational adult self knows and what their wishful, magical thinking of their wounded child self wants to believe. The rational adult self understands and accepts that the relationship is toxic and irreparable. The hurting child self says, but wait, I can figure out a way to hold on to all the good stuff and make it work. Hurting child self does this through a variety of self deceptions and other self defense mechanisms like denial, minimization, justification, and intellectualizing, with a dash of cognitive distortions and cognitive dissonance. Um, Many of these clients will, when I'm first working with them, they'll say certain things, sort of tick off uh, okay, the recognition for me as their therapist that, okay, there's probably a trauma bond here. Okay, emotionally speaking, this is a younger way of looking at things. And so that's how I know where to go. And some of these statements are things like, but I love her, or but I love him. It's not bad all of the time. She can be so sweet when all the planets line up. You don't just give up on someone you love. Her dad or mom was mean or abandoned her as a child. She was abused and bullied in school, or I can take it, or if only I could get them to see how much I love her. Everyone's a little crazy sometimes, or if I give up now, the next guy will get the amazing love bomby her. These are the rationalizing, justifying, and minimizing beliefs of a hurting, self deceiving child who's afraid to lose love and relationship. Or rather, what a hurting child believes is love. It's not love, though. No matter how cruel, unstable, crazy, and dysfunctional their parents are, kids want their moms and dads' love and approval above all else. When a child feels unloved or rejected by a parent, they usually blame themselves when they're younger, and then as adolescents, they can become quite angry at that parent. If you can relate to this, it's not your fault your parents had problems. It's also not your fault your narcissistic, borderline, or histrionic partner has problems. However, it is your adult responsibility to take care of yourself and make better choices moving forward. You couldn't fix your borderline mom or dad, and you can't fix your borderline spouse. In order to cope and survive, kids need to believe they can fix, please, prove their worthiness to their parents, and get love. In trying to do this, it can manifest in several unhealthy childhood behaviors, such as parentification. That's when a child takes care of the parents emotionally or physically. For example, acting as the emotional regulator of an emotionally dysregulated parent. A lot of clients who are seeing their kids, this happen to their kids in real time, where their identities, the children's identities, are being wrapped up in how well they can emotionally regulate an emotionally dysregulating, borderline narcissistic, or histrionic mom. This is child abuse. It's impossible. And as I said, it's a child on the road to either developing a personality disorder themselves or becoming a codependent. Uh, Another unhealthy manifestation is emotional incest, which is basically a more extreme form of parentification in which the child acts as a sort of junior spouse or partner substitute. Overachieving behaviors. In an attempt to get approval and validation, the child believes if they're perfect, mom or dad will love them. Selflessness. The child learns that mom and dad sees their feelings, needs, and wants as a burdensome nuisance, and thus the road to being a people-pleasing codependent begins. Namely, I don't have any needs. What makes me happy is making other people happy. Yes, I have clients who say that. When I ask them what makes you happy, they will say making other people happy. When they say that, we've got some work to do. Back to my list. Self-medicating, drugs, alcohol, video games, social media, promiscuity, basically anything that releases dopamine for the child or adolescent. Finally, acting out and acting in because, hey, attention is attention. One of the things I think would be good for you to do if you can identify with the information I'm sharing here is to identify the age or ages when you sustained those types of emotional childhood wounds. Um, when you tell yourself or convince yourself that you can help your narcissist, borderline, or histrionic ex or partner, what are the rationales you're using for that? And can you take back to experiences from your childhood when you were having similar thoughts about your mom and or dad? Um, what is the age, that emotional age of yourself who insists that there's a happily ever after if only you fill in the blank enough to fix your abuser? And what roles do they serve? For example, some clients will identify sort of this fawning 4-year-old who just keeps heaping love and, oh, you're so amazing, you're so good. Uh, Others have identified sort of the 12-year-old little professor who overanalyzes everything and believes that they can just figure out what the problem is and they can fix things. Which, of course, you cannot fix anybody else. Um, the narcissist or borderline has to recognize that there's a problem and that they need to do the work to change. You cannot do that for them. When clients are in their rational, critical thinking adult minds, they're able to clearly see the narcissist or borderline partner or ex for who and what they are. In other words, highly destructive to themselves and others and unlikely to change. When my clients are in their rational adult mind, they understand that a healthy relationship with the NPD, BPD, or HPDX is not possible, and that continuing to try to fix, save, or rescue the cluster B partner only creates more pain and damage to themselves and their kids. In many cases, reason, logic, and a firm grasp on objective reality alone are insufficient to effect healthy changes, especially when a client has experienced childhood abuse and trauma. Healing from abuse involves working with the younger, irrational, and hurting child parts of yourself. In other words, the age or ages you were when a similarly dysfunctional, abusive parent created these wounds and traumas. Do the work or keep repeating the pattern. When clients persevere in an abusive relationship, especially after they've identified it as abusive, it's usually because the younger part of themselves is behind the steering wheel or in control, if you will. In other words, they're using the same rationalizations and justifications they did when they were kids, and that is when they lacked the power to end the parent-child relationship in order to stay in the toxic adult relationship in the present. They engage in self-deception, magical thinking, and other codependency and trauma bond related childlike forms of emotional reasoning. And they do this in order to preserve the relationship no matter the cost to them. Can you recognize how you revert to your childhood roles and ways of thinking in your past or present relationship with a narcissist or borderline? Whether it's your partner, an ex, a parent, boss, or sibling? How can your rational, compassionate adult self help these younger parts of yourself who cling to the old dysfunctional ways of obtaining love and acceptance? Why is it important to do this? Because it's the only way I know to break one's pattern of toxic relationships for once and for all. If you keep engaging in your old dysfunctional relationship beliefs, behaviors, and patterns, it will result in more of the same old kind of toxic relationships and toxic relationship partners. Do you really want to go through this again? I don't recommend it. Again, I am Dr. Tara Palmatier of shrinkformen.com. If you would like to schedule a session with me, you can reach me at shrinkformen@gmail.com. Thank you for watching and have a very happy New Year's Day. Bye bye.